Aloha friends, Aaron from Hawaii Music School here. And I have a question that came in that I figured I'd use the entire video to answer. Hey Aaron, I just watched a video where you talked about transcribing. Does that mean figuring out a song by ear? If so, is there an easy way to do it? I can teach you an easy way to get started. So this is going to require a few things. So number one, you're going to need to know how to play a scale. Number two, you're going to need to know how to move it around. And number three, we're going to need to know the chords that pertain to said scale. And we have to know the difference between a major chord, a minor chord, and a dominant chord. I'm going to use the example of C. If we're listening to C, we can definitely hear that that's a major sound. It sounds happy and playful to my ear. Now when we go to C minor, some people say it sounds sad. To me, it doesn't sound sad. It sounds a little bit darker. You know, like maybe we're playing outside, it's a sunny day, all of a sudden it gets overcast. Now the dominant chord to me feels incomplete. It feels like it wants to go somewhere else. And I liken it to when you shoot a basketball and it goes and it just kind of rolls around the rim before it falls in. It's waiting to go in, it's just not there yet. So I can hear the difference between major, minor, and dominant. And so you got to be able to do it with any any chord. So if it's C sharp, or like with F, right? You can hear the difference between major, minor, and dominant. G, major, minor, dominant. So you know which ones are which. And once you can kind of distinguish between there, you start to see that it's kind of like a line. Those of us that went to elementary school math know what the number line looks like, right? Where you have the middle being 0, and going this way it's 1 to whatever, and going that way it's 1 to whatever. So once we've kind of got it down, you got 1, -1, all that stuff. What I look at is the dominant as being in the middle. If you go forward, you've got the major. And if you go backwards, you got the minor. In between the dominant and the minor, we find the sound of the diminished. And in between the dominant and the major, we have an augmented. And that's what I like to call the chordal spectrum. You've got the dominant right in the middle, and on either side you've got major and minor. Now before it gets all the way to minor, you've got a diminished. That's kind of leading it more dominant in between diminished and minor. And then you've got the augmented on the other side that's kind of in between dominant and major. Okay, so the next thing I need to know is the scale. I don't need to know all the scales and all the shapes going up the neck, but I do need to know one, at least one shape. And you can learn any shape. It doesn't have to be the shape I'm showing you. The example I'm going to give is with the key of C. 2 reasons. Number 1, no sharps, no flats. And number 2, because it's an ukulele-friendly key. And I'll be able to play all the chords within that key with a bar all the way up the neck. And so that's what I'm looking for in terms of being able to hear things out. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the major scale. Okay, so in the key of C, we have C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and C. Okay, so once I know the shape, I should be able to move it around. So I take the bar, and at first I'm just going to use my finger. And so I'll walk it up, and I'll go. Right? Or I'll go up one more. One more. And I'll continue to move it up the neck until I hear it match up with the song that I'm listening to. Once I hear it match up to the song and all of the notes sound pretty much like they belong there, I'll know that that placement is where my key is. So now the other thing I need to know is the shapes that coincide with said scale. So what I'm going to look at is, that's the 1 chord in the key of C. Right, so that's going to be my C shape. My next shape is going to be the 2, right? And that's D. And in the scale, C, D, right? The number 2 is going to be the minor. So I've got my 2 minor, which is D minor. Now moving on to the 3 chord. The 3 is also minor, and it's going to be an E minor. 4 chord is going to be a major, and that's F. 5 chord is going to be a G, but it's also the dominant in the scale. So whenever I'm looking for the chord that wants to bring me back, like remember how I talked about the basketball going around the rim? It wants to fall in. So in this case, this is G7, and it wants to lead me back to C. So the 5 chord is going to be a G or a G7. My 6th chord is going to be the A minor. My 7th chord is going to be a diminished chord. In this case, it's a B. And then we're going to go back to the C. So once we know the shapes, we have 1, which is C, 2, which is D minor, 3, which is E minor, 4, which is F, 5, which is G or G7, 6, which is A minor, B diminished for 7, and C. Once we know that, we'll know the chords within that picture. So the same way I can use those shapes here, I'm going to move them up the neck. So if I'm playing a scale, right, so I move it here, that's not quite it. Nope, still not it. Still not it. Hey, there we go. That sounds kind of like the song. All right, so this is the key. I know now that that's where everything starts to line up with what I'm listening to. So now I listen to chords that are moving. Are they major? Are they minor? Are they dominant? So now if I listen, it sounds major. So I can use either this chord, or this chord. Okay, so I'm going to use this shape here. That's not quite it. Hey, there we go. That sounds like that chord. Now the next chord sounds minor. Yeah, that's it right there. Okay, the next chord. It sounds major, but there's something a little bit different about it. It sounds dominant. And then the last chord, it definitely sounds major. So now I can hear out that my progression is going to be there. What chords are those? Well, let's look at it. So we started here. This was C, C sharp, D, D sharp. Okay, so this is a key of D sharp that we're in here. So our 4 shape in the key of D sharp is going to actually be a G sharp. The next chord, our D minor shape, is going to be an F minor chord. Our 5 chord shape in the key of D sharp is going to be a B7 chord. And we're going to go back to the D sharp. So now we know what chords we played. And we listened by ear. We figured out if it was major, minor, or dominant. Then we looked at the scale. And we figured out what the pitch was. Once we found the pitch, we used the chords that coincide with that said scale. And we figured out basically what the chords are to the song. We could actually take it a step further and use the cops always get free donuts method to find an easier place to play it on the neck, or even just to move it around up and down the fretboard. So if you start there, start with an easy song. Start with something that is comfortable for you to hear. Like Hawaiian music is great because the chords are pretty basic. We use major, we use dominant, sometimes we use minor, but not as often as the major and the dominant. So what you'll do is you start hearing these things. Keep in mind in Hawaiian music though, sometimes we use the 2 chord as the dominant. So in this case, C, D minor, that 2 might be a D7. So keeping that in mind, you should be able to figure out at least all the basic Hawaiian songs by now, and just use your method to find what key you're in. And once you know the key, use the cops always get free donuts method to go up and down the neck and find out where you are. Hopefully this has been helpful, guys, and hopefully I answered your question. Aloha!